Hey there, it is Tomster here on behalf of Indestructible Productions, and once again, back with another episode of the Scum Build video series. Now, finally getting to the staining process. So, I am very straightforward with this. So, I am using the Crimson Guitars Stunning Stains, purple, straight out of the bottle. And, excuse me. And yeah, it's, if you haven't applied this stain or any water-based stain before, it is a very easy process. You move in or move out from the inside so that you don't get any drips on the edge. And basically you just keep on overlapping and blending in each pass with the previous pass. I actually have a really in-depth tutorial coming up on this that I filmed last week, and I'll go over some of the finer details about staining a guitar in this manner. But yeah, just moving up very slowly, keeping on blending in the stain as I go. And I go cross grain because I've found that actually gives me a much tidier and more solid looking stain job than if I were to go with the grain. With the grain, it usually, well, with this sort of veneer top that I have on here, it's not that big of a deal, but with a lot of other sort of woods with much straighter grain, you kind of get a very different effect out of that, but I just found that this just gives me much better coverage and much more control. Basically, if I have any sort of very nice figuring in the wood, I try and use this method. For instance, like if I had flame, I would definitely go with the flame so that the stain kind of seeps into the flame itself instead of all the grain around it. And yeah, and because this veneer has all these sort of like small pockets, I'm just kind of like dabbing those areas a little bit with the stain. So yeah, and once I've done the top, I go ahead and just do a quick blending pass to kind of get rid of all those, how would I say, all those stroke marks. Sides and back getting exactly the same treatment. With the sides, it's not that big a deal. You just go along the sides instead of trying to go from the middle to the edge. It doesn't really matter. Just be careful not to have any drips or runs going on to the back or the front, because that would be a bit of a pain to kind of try and get rid of those. I usually do staining in 4 different passes. I do the top, the sides, the back, and the neck. And this guitar also gets a tiny little, well, sort of faux binding effect, where I sand away the edge of the veneer, just to create a little bit of contrast and a little bit of make it a little bit more distinguished from the rest of the guitar. Nice little added detail. I do this at this point already because the stain hasn't fully seeped in yet, it hasn't dried off. It's touch dry, but it's not dry enough to have seeped all the way through on the veneer. So sanding away at this point makes life a lot easier. And I'm just using basic 320 grit to do this. Nice crisp line all the way through. As for the back, the exact same principle applies as to the front. And yeah, it's a fairly straightforward process when you get down to it. This is just, I will point out that masking off things like I have here with the back inlay, it is so important that if you're staining, it's so important that you burnish that masking tape down so that none of the stain can seep through. Especially because it is water-based, you do run the risk of having too much of the stain and then it's seeping through the masking tape. Another easy way to avoid that is just to have not that much stain on your rag or whatever method you're using, cloth, and just kind of wipe it on dry around the masking tape. I'm not really worried about that because I've been very, very careful and burnished everything down. So I'm just applying stain as I usually would apply stain. Once again, blending in as I go. Now, as I wait for the stain to fully dry and for me to continue onwards, I decided to paint the pickup cavities. I'm just using just normal acrylic black paint to, paint the pickup cavities. It's pretty straightforward here. I'm only doing this because I realized that it will look a lot better because the pickups are getting direct mounted, that it will look a lot cleaner if I actually paint the pickup cavities instead of, for instance, having them bare as they are. And yes, I could have also stained them purple, but somehow black felt a little more appropriate. So once that's all done, it's time to move on to sanding. Now, I've let the stain here cure for a good few hours, and in a dry room as well, just to ensure that it is completely dry, completely cured, that there's no pigment and moisture left on the surface, because that would indeed be a bit more difficult. If you don't let your stain dry for long enough, if you try and sand it in between, you will get a very blotchy result. The reason why I am sanding in between is because I do have rather nice figuring, and I want that to pop a little more. So I'm sanding the surface, which means that all the figuring and the grain will have more stain in it, which means that it will pop out a lot more. But I'm also doing this because I've noticed that having a couple of layers of stain actually brings out the color a lot more. And sanding in between just makes it a little more solid, makes it look a lot more vibrant, a lot more alive, which is something that I'm really looking for, or actually really want to go for, especially with this guitar. So yeah, sanding everything down, either 400 or 320 will do just fine. And using a block for all the nice and square surfaces. I'm not taking a huge amount off, I'm just taking basically the surface layer off. I'm not trying to remove the stain, I'm just trying to, well, I'm just trying to go for a certain type of effect, taking off the prime layer of pigment, which oddly enough made this guitar turn a little bit more blue than it did purple, which also affects how the next layer of color will go on. And of course, the guitar is now covered in dust, so to get rid of that, I'm just going to use an air hose and carefully blow out all the dust from the grain, any nooks, crannies, crevices, stuff like that, because I want my surface to be absolutely clean before I begin restaining. So carefully going over every facet of the guitar. And then it's time to move on to the next layer of stain, which goes on just the same way as the previous layer did. It is a very simple process. But yeah, in doing this stain in this way, I'm ensuring a very solid color all the way through, bringing out the difference in the figuring and the grain by sanding in between and creating a little bit of contrast. But yeah, it's just the same technique as before. Basically, it all just boils down to blending in different ways.
Alrighty, as this video is about to wrap up very soon, basically I'm staining the neck just along the grain and blending in as I go. It's the same process, it's just moving a different part of the guitar. But we are reaching the end of the video, so I would like to thank each and every one of you who stuck out till the end watching this. Be sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comments below what you guys think. I'll see you guys next week. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Do so. Tell your friends. Tell them to subscribe too. Check out the Instagram. All the links down below. Check out the Facebook page. Links down below. And see you guys next week. Bye bye.